Doing, everybody? I'm a minute late this morning. Just bear with me. Good on YouTube, Instagram. I think we're live everywhere. We are all systems go. Working. Should we get at it? Let's get at it. How I put Ion on pause. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Mornings with Scott, the best damn business show for medium and small businesses on the planet. It is March 11, 2025, episode 336. I knew I forgot something. I should be putting my headphones in. See if these Bluetooth guys make a difference. There we go. That should be working. How's that now, Ashley? Is that a little bit better depth? Let me know on Facebook, please. All right, where was I? Best damn business show for medium and small businesses on the planet. March 11, 2025, episode 336. So The Grow, a weekly review of the business of cannabis, a brand new podcast, was released this morning, episode 0. So this podcast is about the business of cannabis. So businesses operating in the cannabis industry is geared towards CEOs, presidents, business owners, investors in that space. And it's easiest to define what it's not about. It's not about what every other so-called business podcast in the cannabis space is about, which is what? It's about, regulation. Things that are outside my control. If only this regulator did that, and look at that state regulator did this. It's about consumer preference. That's what other podcasts are about. We got a hot new product in the beverage space, so this vaping thing seems to be selling well. It's about genetics. The efficacy and the health benefits and so on and so forth. Well, that's not what this is about. There's plenty of content out there for that. What this podcast, The Grow, is about is pursuing the hypothesis that cannabis business is in fact viable again. It's at the bottom. Not easy. It's just starting, but you can in fact be profitable in a new cannabis business, in a small cannabis business. You can raise capital. There are funds available for the cannabis business. And you can create value. You can create shareholder value. So that's what this podcast, the new podcast, The Grow, will be about. And it's going to be based on business fundamentals. Some of those fundamentals, maybe most of them, aren't specific to the cannabis industry, but I'll gear them towards the cannabis industry as much as possible. We're going to talk about how to make more money, how to raise business capital, how to restructure if you need to restructure, how to merge and sell and buy, M&A in the industry. And so that's what that podcast is going to be about, The Grow. And you can go find it right now. We released the first episode 0 this morning, which is an introduction, but it also populates all the hosting services. Like you put it up on I think we use Buzzsprout as a service, and then that goes out to Apple and to Google and to Spotify. It's also available on YouTube. It's got its own channel now. So go check that out. It will be once a week, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, just a quick hit on real facts, business stuff in the cannabis industry. So that should be fun. How are the markets today? Well, they were not good yesterday. Huge sell off and a de-risking continues. We talked about that yesterday on the show. This morning, when I looked on, everything was red as I was preparing notes about an hour ago. And then as I was logging in to go live, things seem to have reversed. So the volatility continues. That's the bottom line. Bitcoin hit 76,000 last night. That's pretty low. When I was preparing notes about an hour and a half ago, it was 81,000. So it's popped back up as it does again. We're in a de-risking, highly volatile market right now. Keep an eye on MicroStrategy. We've talked about them on the show before. This is the formerly a software company, which still has some sort of software service. I don't even remember what it is. But what they do now is buy Bitcoins. They borrow money, they raise equity, they sell shares, they issue bonds, and they take that money and they buy Bitcoin. Well, MicroStrategy was down 16.68% just yesterday, because they live and die with the value of Bitcoin. And at some point, when Bitcoin falls enough, the value of MicroStrategy will fall below what is a covenant in their debt agreements. I don't know what that covenant is. A covenant is a promise. Hey, we'll do this and we'll do that. And from a financial point of view, we'll make this amount of money and whatever. And if you break that covenant, well, that's a problem with lenders. This company, I think, is going to be in serious trouble. I think it's over-levered. It's tied to one asset. If that asset goes down to a certain level, the company's going to be toast, and their $62.1 billion market cap this morning may not survive. Listen, folks, we're in a recession. We are in a recession in the U.S. Think back to 2022. Do you remember 2022 when we were definitely in a recession? But we just changed the definition of recession in the U.S. and then we were fine. Oh no, it's not consecutive quarters of negative growth. It's not. That's not what a recession is. The labor market's strong. Don't worry about it. Well, that's what happened under the Biden administration. Now it's not the Biden administration. We're going back to the old definitions, and we are or are about to be in a recession. Remember, government spending is part of GDP. If a recession is negative growth, negative GDP, then government spending being cut back is going to create a recession. Like that's just the math of the situation, but it's necessary. It's necessary, and it does not mean that your private enterprise outside of the public sector is going to suffer or suffer much. But there is great volatility, particularly if you're an investor. Wall Street Journal reported yesterday that stocks slid Monday as concerns about the U.S. economy tipped into a recession grow. The Dow gave up nearly 900 points. The S&P fell 2.7%. The NASDAQ composite tumbled 4% as shares of big tech companies extended their sell-off. Tesla stock lost 15%. That's more political than I should be buying lots of Tesla stock. That's more political than reality. It lost 15%. Shares of the other Magnificent Seven stocks, Apple, Microsoft, Alphabet, Amazon, NVIDIA, Meta platforms, fell between 2 and 5% each. President Trump over the weekend refused to rule out the U.S. entering recession this year, telling Fox News there will be a period of transition. Transition. Remember, that is code word for it's going to get worse before it gets better. Because what we're doing is very big. In contrast, Howard Lutnick, do you remember we talked about this fellow yesterday and his idea that Canadians are all liars and they have sneaky tariffs in the form of a sales tax? There's going to be no recession in America, said Lutnick. We are already in a recession, Mr. Lutnick, Secretary Lutnick. So this is from, check my Instagram, Two Trick Al Dick joined Instagram. Cool. I like Two Trick Al Dick. That's a name from my childhood. I like this story. So this is from a from a wire service, if I can put it that way, or a subscription news service out of the US on US bankruptcies. And on the border, Mexican Grill and Cantina, which operates a full service Tex Mex casual dining chain, has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. I like this story because it covers absolutely everything in the formal bankruptcy process and hammers home some of the points that we have talked about on this Mornings with Scott business show. The company best known for mesquite grilled fajitas, yum, signature margaritas, even more yum, and endless chips and salsa, delivering a bar-centric dining experience, excuse me, with an extensive Tex-Mex menu. The brand emphasizes high energy, fiesta atmosphere, leveraging themed events, loyalty programs, value-driven promotions to drive customer engagement. As of the petition date is when the company files for protection under the bankruptcy code, Chapter 11. They had 80 locations globally, including 60 leased corporate owned restaurants. Did you listen yesterday? Did you listen to the show yesterday when I say 60 leased corporate owned restaurants? Does that trigger anything for you? We're going to come to that. Across 18 US states, 20 franchise locations in the US and South Korea. They filed Chapter 11 on March 4th. In Georgia, they reported $10 to $15 million. That's you need when you file for Chapter 11. You need to tick off sort of what range you're in of assets and debt. So they ticked off $10 to $15 million on both the asset and the liability side. So this business, The Border, was founded in 1982 in Dallas. On the Border South Texas Cafe, it used to be called. In 94, Brinker International acquired the company, accelerating its growth, opening its first franchise locations. Yay, things are good. 2001, they had surpassed 100 domestic restaurants, and in 2007, they went to South Korea in franchise units. Why South Korea? That just seems a weird move to me, but what do I know? 2010, Brinker International sold On the Border, including 160 cantinas at the time, to Golden Gate Capital. Yay, income the PE funds to strip out all the equity for their fund. And then in 2014, so that was in 2010, in 2014, Golden Gate Capital transferred ownership to Border Holdings LLC, an affiliate of Argonne Capital Group. What does that mean? Does that mean they sold it? No. In the PE world, we've talked about this on prior episodes, the funds have a certain life. And one way as a PE banker to exit a deal, to realize on your gains so you can get your pay and bonuses, is just to flip this asset over to another fund that you also happen to own. And then you've got this paper transaction and you're able to close up the first fund. It's probably what happened there. So they operate 60 leased corporate-owned stores, 20 franchise locations. At the time that they filed, they had 2,800 staff members, including 375 full-time hourly workers and 2,200 part-time hourly employees, and 216 salaried personnel. Their performance is significantly impacted by challenging macroeconomic conditions. We are in a recession, folks. Inflation pressures have driven the restaurant menu prices higher, and other consumer goods are also higher, reducing the customer willingness to eat out. People are not going to restaurants as much as they used to. Labor costs have outpaced price increases, and more than half of the U.S. states raised minimum wages. So remember all these minimum wage raises in the Biden administration, primarily done by the states. Well, that has caused labor prices obviously to go up, and these restaurants just can't afford to pay that, as everybody with half a brain knew was going to be the issue. The company has struggled to recruit and retain a sufficient workforce, which made operational efficiencies impossible. And so all of that means that they were not making enough money. Yet at the same time, this goes on and says the lease burdens, remember we talked about leases yesterday, And underperforming restaurants, as at the date that they filed, the company had 113 active restaurant leases, many tied to non-operational underperforming locations. So we talked yesterday about the idea in the business course that I'm module 4 that I've written and will shoot later this week or the weekend, I hope, because it is good to go. Finally, people, I know you've been waiting for that. We talked about how to reduce costs. And when you think about your fixed costs, you should think about them in 2 buckets. One bucket being discretionary. Well, I spend so much on my marketing, and my marketing expense doesn't go up and down depending on how many units I sell. My marketing expense is a discretionary fixed cost that I decided to spend $100,000 on marketing, and I ended up selling whatever number of units because of that. It's not that my expense went up because of the units I sold, is the other way around. That is a discretionary fixed cost. But another type of fixed cost is a contractual non-discretionary fixed cost. That is a lease. Have you ever tried to go negotiate a lease reduction voluntarily with your landlord? I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying you have no cards, as President Trump would tell Zelensky. You have no cards. You can't really negotiate that. The only way to break and get out of a negative contract is through a formal restructuring where you get a court to help you get out of those things. That's why you see restaurants file. That's why you see retail chain. Everybody that has leases all over the place, that is a solution for them. And so the high rent costs of non-performing sites created significant liquidity strains, prompting the company to pursue lease rejections, closing locations. They vacated 40 stores on or about February 2025 to reduce its footprint and deploy the staff where, at other stores that were actually making money since they couldn't fire enough staff anyways. And these closures targeted restaurants deemed too costly due to the rent burden. So that's, as we discussed yesterday. Some might argue they waited too long. They could have. Why, if you were in a negative contract and you could just watch it, you could just watch it kill you day by day or month by month when it comes to a lease, and you know that your liquidity is going bad, that you have no cash flow. And as Mr. Wonderful says, if you have no cash flow, you're dead. Well, I don't know why you wouldn't have dealt with this sooner. In the months leading up to the bankruptcy filing, the company's liquidity rapidly deteriorated, forcing it to suspend vendor payments and rent payments. So that just seems like a, should I swear? That just seems like a marriage show. Vendors and landlords cut off services, withheld goods, exercised set-off rights, so on and so forth. So after exploring multiple alternatives to raise capital, they couldn't and filed for Chapter 11. So why I'm stuck in this lease? It's not performing. If I wasn't in that lease, I would have better cash flow. If I had better cash flow, I could pay the labor more. I could win the direct labor battle, which if you don't win, you're dead. I could bring people in. All that is generated by getting out of these damn leases that are negative. Why would you raise money based on a negative lease? It makes no sense. No surprise they couldn't raise money, but owned by a PE fund, they're not just going to walk away from this thing easily. They know what's best, and they don't like filing. They don't like filing in submission of defeat. I think that's a really strong driver in these situations. So, persistent labor shortages, declining revenue, enforcement actions contributed to the decision to pursue a strategic asset sale under Section 363 of the Bankruptcy Code. For my Canadian listeners, that's the same as the SISP, the Sales Investment Solicitation Process. Well, close enough as a SISP. The idea here is that you go to the bankruptcy judge, you say, hey, help me out. Help me out. I need to, hold off everybody, just put a stay on everything. And then we're going to get as much money as we can for this business. And then we can take that pot of money and we can give it to the people that are owed that money in the order of their priority, right? And it may not be enough money, judge, to pay everybody. So the people at the bottom aren't going to get anything, but that's what we're going to try and do here. Or we're going to try and maybe change those priorities a little bit so everybody can share a little more equally or more fairly in our minds. And that's what you're doing. So under 363, you are you are selling the assets to somebody else. In January 25, the company engaged Hilco Corporate Finance to market its assets for a possible going concern sale, as opposed to liquidating the assets one deep fryer at a time. And another value maximizing transaction. So Hillcore Corporate Finance, originally an auction firm and liquidator, I believe, but now they're just a global behemoth. And I bet you the person that did the sale process, I talked on shared a stage with them maybe 2 years ago, as I recall. Anyways, they're a legit firm. Hillco contacted 273 strategic and financial bidders. So what does that mean? When you're trying to sell a business, there's two ways to go about it. One is you want to be super secretive because you're, I don't know, Apple, and you're going to Microsoft to borrow some money, which is what Steve Jobs did with Bill Gates back in the day, and Microsoft and Apple was going to go under. And Bill Gates thought, well, we can't have Apple go under because it's good. It's like the McDonald's Burger King. It just makes the market better to have more than one fast food restaurant. And so also it settled litigation between them. And so Jobs went to Gates. Gates gave them some money. And now we have Apple as it is today. Well, Steve Jobs didn't put up an ad on the internet, didn't exist at the time, but he didn't make it known all over Wall Street that they needed money or they're going to go bankrupt. They did not do that. They went, one-on-one. Maybe he went to two or three parties. We don't know the answer to that, but he definitely did it quietly. That's one way to do it. That's not what you can do in this situation, because in this situation, you have to convince the bankruptcy judge, hey, we did the best we can. We got all the money we can, which means you need to go broadly. You can't have just a little quiet conversation and expect the judge to buy into that. So they contacted 273 potential strategic and financial bidders. Strategic means, well, you can go back on the content on this. Maybe I'm running out of time on this particular show, but strategic, generally speaking, means they're not in it just for the financial return. They're in it because when they combine their current operations with the operations they're buying, 1 + 1 = 3. Okay. And that usually means cutting costs, right? You don't need two controllers or two CEOs, that sort of thing. And so 273 potential strategic and financial bidders turned into 31 interested parties. If it were me, I get super stressed if the sales process that we're running at Sinclair Range doesn't have at least 500 on the database. So 273 seems light to me. But on the other hand, 31 parties that signed the NDA, non-disclosure agreement, came back, asked for the package. That's a pretty good number. That's pretty good. And out of the 31, you're going to get 2, 3, 4, 5 that are legit, and you've got the makings of a little auction, which is what you're trying to do. Well, on March 7, 2025, the company entered into a asset purchase agreement. So they're selling the business to OTB Hospitality, structured as a stalking horse purchaser. What does that mean? That means you're entering into this process and you say to a company, okay, I want you to be my buyer. You've worked closely with me. You probably provided me a debtor in possession loan, which is a super priority above the bank kind of loan to give me some working capital to pay the professionals to go through this process. And so I want you in exchange to be the stalking horse bidder. And the stalking horse bidder, you enter into a deal, and the stalking horse says, hey, I value the business at this much. And now for somebody else out of the auction process to win, they have to beat that stalking horse. And if they do, the stalking horse usually gets a breakup fee. So they're in the driver's seat, but from Hilco's perspective, from the company's perspective, from the perspective of the bankruptcy court, well, you're not just opening up this to everybody and getting $2 bids. You've got a floor. So the stalking horse bid consisted of a credit bid. In other words, they provided the dip, potential for additional cash, a bid that allowed other people to come in so they could bid up to May 1, 2025. So this is still ongoing. Somebody can come in right now and beat the stalking horse bid. So they're running this auction, and you would have to bid in $150,000 increments above, and there's a $600,000 breakup fee, as I said. So if the stalking horse bidder doesn't win, they get a bunch of fees back out of the deal for having agreed to do all this. And then it goes on that, in fact, they did provide a dip I guess I wish that was structured the other way around for this. Anyways, I love that story because it has everything. We're covering how to deal with fixed costs. Um, the fact that we should have filed this thing sooner, all the trouble you can get into if you don't act quickly enough, the idea of a 363 sale, the M&A process, the auction process, stalking horse bids. It's a good little case study. I like that. So that was a good review from this morning. Investment Executive. That is a Bay Street journal, newspaper, online. Back in the day, it used to come to you printed to your office. So it was kind of cool. I don't know about it anymore. Investors in the funds, Bridging Finance. Do you remember our old friends at Bridging Finance? We've talked about this many. I am not friends with anybody at Bridging Finance. That's not true, by the way. There was one guy there I quite liked, maybe even two, and they were victims of all this, all this potential fraud. Investors in the funds of Bridging Finance are finally poised to get some money back after a court approved a proposed distribution to the unit holders, although less than originally thought by the receiver, PwC. So to remind you, Bridging Finance was a Toronto-based private debt lender. And the way these private debt lenders work is I don't want to say they're a broker or they're a front organization, but they kind of are. It's not their own, often, not always 100% of the time, often not their own money that they're lending out to companies. And the product in this case was bridge loans, high yield, hopefully secured. The intent is get your money back in a year. Instead, you set up this operation and you get a commitment of funding from a larger fund, and you act as agent and you manage that money. And I believe in the early days of Bridging Finance in Toronto, the relationship was with 9 Point Partners, someone who I think we'll be talking a lot about in upcoming episodes and months. And 9 Point Partners funded a lot of these private lenders around Canada, most of which am I supposed to swear again? The merd hit the fan. Following a hearing last month, Ontario Superior Court of Justice largely approved a motion from Bridging's court-appointed receiver, PwC. I think PwC has done a terrific job on this file, by the way. I have followed along. I've said that over and over again, and I have no particular affiliation with PwC. I just think it's good when a receiver does a decent job and communicates well, which sought the court's permission to finally make a payout to the 26,000 retail investors whose funds have effectively been frozen since 2021. Retail investors, that's you, Ashley. That's you, who's ever Al Dick and whoever else is on Instagram listening to this. These are individuals who, as part of in Canada, their RSP IRA, as part of that, are going to their broker and buying some units of this fund as part of their wealth management planning, as part of their investment. These are not sophisticated institutions. These are retail investors buying a little bit. And when you buy these funds and mutual funds, which I believe to be the 9 Point Partners structure, the definition of a mutual fund is you need liquidity every day. You can go, if you've got $10,000 or $5,000 into this fund that Bridging at the time was managing. By the way, I should say that 9 Point, to my understanding, got out of this Bridging thing long before the trouble started. So I do want to say that I maybe not long before, but they weren't part of the disaster of Bridging. They're part of the disaster of other stuff for sure, but not of Bridging. So I feel like I'm tying these things together stronger than I ought to be, and I don't want to do that. So just let me disclose that. I don't believe that they're part of all this. And the problems, by the way, are 100% on the Bridging side. They're wherever their money comes from or came from, it doesn't really matter. This is the Bridging people that have caused all this problem. Anyways, liquidity. So you as a retail investor, you're in this fund. It's a mutual fund. You're supposed to get your money out every day, except the use of that fund is to go in loans that may be paid back in a year, may be extended to 18 months, may never come back at all, particularly if you're self-dealing and you let the money to yourself or to your partner and came up with some sort of shady thing and you never pay the money back, which seems to be my reading of what had happened at the bridging scenario. So at the time, the funds were supposed to have $2 billion in AUM, assets under management. That would be the size of the funds that bridging was managing. And PwC estimated that it will end up recovering less than half of that total. I think it will be less than half of that total. I had heard zero. I heard zero because bridging had guaranteed a condo development on Bloor and Young, and I believe that to be true. But I think, on the other hand, the recovery of zero is clearly fake news. So I don't know what happened to that guarantee. I haven't found any public reports on that. I haven't bothered to phone anybody for the inside scoop. But the fact of the matter is, this thing is a mess, and the retail investors are getting hurt as a result. All right, so that was bridging, released in the Globe and Mail. No, sorry, an investment executive, but in the Globe and Mail today or yesterday, OSC alleges Emerge Canada senior executives improperly borrowed $6 million from investor funds for their ETF fund. ETF is an exchange traded fund. It's basically, it's not a mutual fund. It's supposed to be lower cost, and you create a fund and it goes public and the shares trade on the exchange. So you can also invest in that fund by buying the shares. So they allege that two senior executives improperly borrowed $6 million of investor money to cover operating expenses to run the company. So you start a fund, you've got all these rules. Give us your money. We're going to manage it. This is how our fees are going to work, and we're going to generate a return net of our fees, and we're going to give that money back to you. That's the way that works. Except the allegation here is immediately these Emerge Canada people started borrowing money and taking it not really for personal lifestyle, which was some of the allegations on the bridging side, but taking that money and using it to run the fund company, not the fund itself, but you need a manager of that fund. And the manager of that fund needs a lease. They need a real estate on Bay Street. They need high price business school people that are analysts and traders or whatever it is that they're doing. They need to go to nice Bay Street lunches and dinners and have a bunch of drinks. Like, this is not cheap. And so the bottom line is, you need a fund of about, let's say, $100 million, maybe in an ETF even more, to break even. Like, if someone ever says to you, hey man, start a fund for 20 million, I'll give you $20 million and you can run a fund under a standard, fee structure, 220, whatever, that's not profitable. You're not going to break even. You need about $100 million. Well, this fund at its peak was 110 million. Okay. In the early days, it was 110. At its peak, it was $110 million. And so what did they do? Scoop the money to you, according to the OSC. According to the OSC, not according to me. I don't know these guys. Scooped the money and used it to fund their lease and all of their high-priced people. I assume. I haven't looked into their financials, but that's what happens in that business. I see it quite often. So the OSC is alleging this against this, and I do want to say, innocent until proven guilty with the OSC. Often the OSC is wrong and or ineffectual, even though it's a related party justice system. The OSC people charge the company or the person with the securities license. This is the Ontario Securities Commission, by the way. Think of it as the SEC in the US. And so they charge the person, and then they have to go to a tribunal or a hearing or whatever. And the judge, the panelist, is the dude in the office next door from the OSC. And they still lose. Or they win, and then it gets appealed to a real court and they lose. So that is the death spiral of the OSC, trying their best to do a good job. I'm friends with ex-commissioners of the OSC. I'm not trying to pick on them, but that just seems to be the statistical history of that organization. So beware. As a retail investor, beware. Things go wrong in these sorts of funds. Wall Street Journal reports that the Canadian oil and gas could be excluded from the U.S. tariffs. Oh no, we're going to exclude U.S. tariffs, said the Chris Wright, told a global energy conference in Houston that our active discussions with President Trump's administration and with trading partners about the tariff issue, which has fractured relations between the US and Canada. As a Canadian, let me tell you, who does business in the US, let me tell you, it is not the tariffs that has fractured relations between the US and Canada. Nobody passionately cares about the tariffs. Nobody. We don't like them. We think it's terrible business, but we don't it's just business. Nobody really cares about none of you listening really care about the tariffs. It pisses you off, sure, but you don't really care. What you care about, what gets you to the core, is this 51st state. We're going to take your sovereignty discussion. And the idea, I heard Scott Adams yesterday say that this is this is showing respect to Canadians. We love you so much, we'll take you over. We'll be welcomed as liberators. You ever heard that from the US before? Come on. So that's what really has fractured relationships between US and Canada. I don't know that it'll ever be the same. I have never in my life of 59 years, coming to 60 years, I have never seen Canadians this united before. In the meantime, when they think that maybe the tariffs will be dropped on Canadian energy, Ontario, as I said yesterday, slammed today, I believe, a 25% electricity tariff on certain states that they export to. And Daniel Smith yesterday, I know I'm a little bit over time, a couple of minutes here, but I was also late. And this is my last point, gave what I think to be one of the best speeches in the sense of just matter of fact, correct, no spin. Daniel Smith, Premier of Alberta, the person that sits on top of all the oil. Here was her speech from yesterday. Canada has a secret weapon in the trade conflict, a trump card. There's a good little pun for you. And it's located directly under our feet. It's called Alberta Energy. You see, Alberta happens to have one of the largest deposits of oil and gas on the planet. And Alberta would love to increase the amount of oil and gas we send to our southern neighbors. Currently, the U.S. buys about $100 billion a year of highly discounted oil from Alberta. Remember, I've told you before, it sells like a 25, 30% discount because Canada is too stupid to build infrastructure to have a competitive marketplace to sell to other customers. And also, we don't value add any of these, or much anyways, of this energy. So it sells about 100 billion to the US, of which tens of thousands of US workers and refineries then upgrade that into $300 billion worth of value to sell around the world. Why do Canadians not do that themselves? Crazy. So we have a lot of Americans. We have made a lot of Americans very wealthy, she says, and it's in both our countries' best interest to double the amount of Canadian crude moving south. It would mean more Canadian jobs. It would mean more American jobs. It means lower fuel prices for consumers and more U.S. Canadian influence around the world. She says we've been approached by several new pipeline proposals to make more Alberta oil and natural gas available to the U.S. But given the U.S. president's stated goal of U.S. energy dominance, to state it simply, the U.S. cannot be anything approaching energy dominant without Canada supplying a portion of the oil and gas. It's just a fact. And we want to facilitate that. And I'm going to start skipping on this so we can get to the end. Really would be an ultimate win-win scenario. But how can Alberta actively partner to expand pipeline access to the United States when its president just slapped a 10% tariff on products and 25% tariff on other provinces and industries in our country? I love that Daniel Smith is taking a broader perspective of this for Canada. I was fearful that would not be the case, but in this speech she is. The answer is that we can't and we won't. Come back to reality. We will focus on efforts and financial means to export one of the largest oil and gas deposits in the world elsewhere. We will look to our own nations, West and East and North Coast. We will partner with industry provinces, First Nation, industry, provinces, First Nations, and the federal government to build multiple oil and gas pipelines to all of our coasts for the purpose of dramatically increasing Canadian energy sold to Asia and Europe. As soon as the U.S. government is prepared to respect our country and treat us as allies and partners again, we will welcome the opportunity to partner with them to achieve North American energy dominance with Canada. I love the speech. I love the speech. Well done, Daniel Smith from Alberta. Now, export tax 25%, just like Ontario did. then we've got something. That's exactly what I've been calling for. And reinforce this. If you're talking to your politicians, pick up the phone, write them an email. This is what we should be looking for. I'm way over time. That's what happens when I wake up late and I just throw a bunch of stuff into notes and hope that it all works out. I hope it did. Go check out that Grow, the podcast. Hit subscribe, like all those sorts of things. Talk to you tomorrow.